Darren and Kane Callaghan were born in the ruins of Liverpool's broken docks, two brothers bound by blood, hardened by poverty, and destined to rule a city built on crime. From petty thieves to underworld kings, their rise would ignite decades of violence, betrayal, and revenge that turned ordinary streets into war zones and family loyalty into a death sentence. What began as survival soon became legend, a brutal story whispered in pubs, written in blood, and remembered as the darkest chapter in Liverpool's criminal history. Liverpool in 1984 was a city on its knees. The docks that had once pumped life into its heart were shutting down one by one, leaving thousands of men with no work and no hope. Entire neighborhoods fell silent, their windows boarded up, their streets ruled by hunger and desperation. In the crumbling estates of Toxteth, two brothers grew up watching their mother struggle to keep the lights on. Their names were Darren and Kane Callaghan. To outsiders, they were just another pair of lads trying to survive. To those who knew them, they were something different, sharper, hungrier, and far more dangerous. Darren, the elder, by 3 years, carried himself with quiet authority even as a teenager. He didn't need to shout to be heard. People listened when he spoke. He was clever, observant, the kind of boy who watched others' mistakes and learned from them. Kane was his opposite in every way. Loud, impulsive, quick to anger, and always the first to throw a punch. Where Darren thought, Kane reacted. Together, they were unstoppable, a balance of brains and fire that made them respected and feared on the estate. Their criminal beginnings were small, almost harmless. They started out selling stolen car radios and counterfeit cigarettes smuggled from Ireland through the docks. Darren had contacts who worked the night shifts, men willing to look the other way for a few extra quid. Soon the brothers were earning more in a week than their mother made in a month, cleaning offices. What began as survival quickly turned into ambition. The money gave them power, and power gave them purpose. By the late 1980s, the Callaghans were no longer just two lads hustling on the side. They were building an organization. Darren formed connections with older gangsters who had grown rich during the city's heroin boom. Learning how to move goods quietly, how to pay off the right people, and how to disappear when things got too hot. Kane handled the street work, commanding a crew of young men who would do anything for him. They called themselves the Dock Road Boys, and soon their reputation spread far beyond Toxteth. Every nightclub and bar owner in the south end of Liverpool knew the same rule: if you wanted peace, you paid the Callaghans. If you didn't, you found your windows smashed, your cars burned, or worse. Yet the brothers weren't reckless bullies. Darren made sure their violence was measured, controlled, used only to make a point. He understood that chaos scared customers and drew police attention. He wanted an empire built on fear, but not madness. Their growing influence caught the attention of men who had ruled the streets for decades. Some admired the Callaghans' ambition. Others saw them as a threat. In the North End, a powerful crew led by a former boxer named Reese Henderson began to take notice. Henderson had started his own rise in the underground boxing rings, using his fists to collect debts and intimidate rivals. His gang controlled much of the trade in stolen cars and protection rackets north of the city center. For years an uneasy peace existed between his side and Darren's, divided by an invisible border that neither dared to cross. That peace began to crack in 1990, when one of Henderson's trucks carrying stolen electronics disappeared. It later turned up stripped and burned in Callaghan territory. No one could prove who was responsible, but everyone had the same suspicion. For Darren, it was business. For Henderson, it was personal. The tension simmered for months before it boiled over one cold December night. A small pub in Bootle, known as a Henderson hangout, was raided by masked men armed with shotguns. They smashed bottles, fired into the ceiling, and left without taking a single thing. It was a message, one that couldn't be ignored. Days later, a warehouse tied to the Callaghans went up in flames. No one was killed, but the war had begun. Behind closed doors, Darren tried to keep things contained. He knew full-scale conflict would draw police pressure neither side could afford, But Kane saw it differently. To him, backing down meant weakness, and weakness got you killed. The brothers began to drift apart, one trying to make peace, the other preparing for battle. By 1991, Liverpool's underworld was divided. The Callaghans controlled the south. The Henderson crew ruled the north. The police, stretched thin and corrupt in places, could only watch as the two factions grew richer and bolder. Yet for all the money and muscle they had gathered, Darren couldn't shake the feeling that things were moving too fast. Every move they made brought new enemies, and in the shadows whispers spread of betrayal and revenge. In the pubs and betting shops, people started calling them the Brothers in Blood. It was a name born of admiration and fear, a recognition that they had built their empire with nothing but grit, loyalty, and violence. But even then, as the city buzzed with stories of their rise, those who truly understood the streets knew one thing to be certain. In Liverpool, no kingdom lasts forever, and for the Callaghans, the cracks in their crown had already begun to show. The first explosion shattered the quiet of a Sunday afternoon. It was 1993, and Kane Callaghan's black Ford Sierra went up in flames outside a pub in Walton. The blast sent glass and shrapnel across the pavement, leaving a mangled wreck where the car had been parked only minutes before. Kane survived only because he had gone back inside for another drink, but his best friend, who had been waiting in the passenger seat, wasn't so lucky. Within hours, word spread across Liverpool's estates. The Henderson crew had struck first. The attack marked the beginning of a new era for the city's underworld. The fragile peace that had held for years between the North and South factions was gone, replaced by open warfare. Darren Callaghan moved quickly to contain the chaos. He sent men to guard key businesses, rerouted drug shipments, and held secret meetings with his allies to plan their next move. Kane, however, had only one thing on his mind: revenge. Against Darren's orders, he led an attack on a warehouse in Norris Green suspected to belong to Reese Henderson. The building burned through the night, and 2 charred bodies were found inside the next morning. No one needed to ask who had done it. Liverpool was suddenly a city under siege. Gunfire echoed through the streets, cars were torched outside homes, and people disappeared without warning. What began as a feud between 2 gangs spilled over into neighborhoods, dragging innocent families into the nightmare. Businesses closed early, and those who could afford to leave did. The police, overwhelmed and outmatched, formed a special task force to curb the violence. But corruption ran deep, and many officers had long since been bought or threatened into silence. Darren watched the situation spiral beyond his control. He had always believed in discipline, in using fear like a blade, sharp and precise. Now the violence was spreading like wildfire. Each week brought another funeral, another retaliatory strike. Still, he couldn't afford to appear weak. The Callaghans had built their empire on reputation, and reputation was everything. He began reorganizing his network, centralizing control, and cutting ties with anyone he suspected of wavering loyalty. Those who disobeyed orders vanished. Reese Henderson refused to back down. He was older, hardened by years of street fights and prison time, and he saw the Callaghans as reckless upstarts who needed to be crushed. His cousin Finn, quiet but cunning, managed the financial side of their operations, investing profits in legitimate fronts, car dealerships, construction firms, and even charity events. It gave the Henderson crew a veneer of respectability that Darren envied but couldn't replicate. The Callaghans ruled by fear, the Hendersons preferred influence. The clash between them became not only a battle for territory, but for the future of Liverpool's criminal world. In early 1995, the conflict reached its peak. A series of drive-by shootings left 6 men dead in a single month. Nightclubs once filled with laughter now echoed with tension, their owners paying double for protection, just to stay open. Kane, consumed by paranoia, rarely slept. He moved between safe houses, trusting no one except his brother. Darren tried to keep him under control, but the damage was done. Every move Kane made drew attention from the media, from the police, and from rivals eager to see him fall. Then came the night that changed everything. Reese Henderson was shot outside a boxing gym he had owned for years. Witnesses claimed two men on motorbikes pulled up and opened fire before speeding away. Henderson died instantly. The Callaghans denied involvement, but no one believed them. The streets exploded once more, and Finn Henderson, Reese's younger cousin, took command. Unlike Reese, Finn wasn't driven by pride or temper. He was patient, intelligent, and ruthless in ways his cousin had never been. While the Callaghans celebrated what they saw as victory, Finn was quietly rebuilding, gathering allies and studying Darren's weaknesses. By the end of 1997, the landscape had changed. The police had seized millions in drugs and cash. Dozens of lieutenants on both sides were behind bars, and the body count continued to rise. Yet the war wasn't over, it had simply evolved. The streets grew quieter. First story. Deep down he knew his brother was dead, but he needed to see it for himself. For years he searched quietly, hiring private investigators, bribing dock workers, following every whisper. Nothing surfaced. It wasn't until 2008 that the truth finally surfaced in the most unexpected way. A fisherman pulling nets from the River Mersey hooked something heavy. When the police dragged the object to shore, it turned out to be a submerged car, rusted and broken by years underwater. Inside was a skeleton, wrists bound with cable ties, and a gold ring still on the finger. The engraving read one letter. The discovery broke Darren in a way nothing else ever had. For days he didn't speak. When he finally emerged, the calm businessman was gone, replaced by the cold strategist of old. He made no public move against Finn Henderson, but everyone close to him knew that revenge had become his only purpose. The empire he had built to escape his past was now just a weapon to destroy those he believed responsible. From that moment, Darren's operations shifted focus. He tightened his control, purged anyone he suspected of disloyalty, and began expanding aggressively into Spain and Portugal. He stopped trusting the British end of his network entirely, moving his base abroad where police scrutiny was weaker and alliances stronger. Those who remained loyal described him as a man without feeling, quiet, methodical, and obsessed. Liverpool moved on without Kane. The streets were calmer, the media spoke less about gang wars, and a new generation of criminals began to rise. But for those who had lived through the years of blood, the Callaghan name still carried weight. People said Darren's eyes had changed, that whatever humanity had once been in him drowned with his brother in the river. Late at night, he would often drive to the coast outside Marbella, park by the sea, and sit alone for hours. The waves reminded him of home, and the dark water reminded him of what he had lost. For Darren Callaghan, there was no more family, no more loyalty, no more love, only the lingering promise of vengeance that would one day find its mark. When Darren Callaghan left Liverpool, he swore he would never come back. The city that had made him powerful had also taken everything from him. His brother, his peace, and his soul. By 2010, he was living under the name Daniel Clark on the southern coast of Spain, in Marbella, where British crime bosses turned luxury villas into fortresses. The Mediterranean sun shone on streets lined with palm trees and Bentleys. But behind the gates and tinted glass, men like Darren continued the same dark business they had built back home. To the world, Daniel Clark was a successful property investor. His company, Cholera Holdings, specialized in luxury real estate for wealthy clients. He dressed in tailored suits, attended charity galas, and mingled with politicians and celebrities who had no idea who he really was. Behind the facade, though, he was laundering millions in drug money through those same properties, using a complex network of offshore accounts reaching Gibraltar to Cyprus. The system was elegant, invisible, and deadly effective. But beneath the glamour of the Costa del Sol, old rivalries still burned. The British underworld had followed him there. Men from Manchester, Glasgow, and Liverpool, each carving out their own piece of paradise. Among them was Finn Henderson, now a major player in the European drug trade. He had transformed his cousin's old operation into a multinational network, working with Eastern European cartels to distribute cocaine across the continent. Their paths inevitably crossed again, though neither man spoke of the past. For years their conflict had been cold and quiet, but both knew that one wrong move could turn the Sunshine Coast into a war zone. Darren built his empire on control, but even in exile, he couldn't escape betrayal. As his wealth grew, so did his paranoia. He trusted only a handful of people, his right-hand man, Marcus Doyle, and a small team of loyal enforcers. Marcus had been with him since Liverpool, a clever but ruthless operator who understood Darren's moods and motives better than anyone. Together, they ran their business with military precision. Drugs arrived hidden in shipments of marble tiles and fruit containers, moved through warehouses in Malaga, and disappeared across Europe within days. The profits were staggering, but Darren's hunger for expansion blinded him to the cracks forming within his circle. In 2013, disaster struck. Spanish authorities intercepted a shipment of cocaine hidden inside crates of red wine bound for the UK. The seizure made international headlines, British property mogul linked to drug empire, and although Darren's name was never directly mentioned, he knew the leak came from inside his organization. Someone had talked. Within hours he launched his own investigation, tracing phone records, financial transfers and messages. The pattern pointed to Marcus Doyle. It didn't make sense at first. Marcus had been like family, loyal through every storm. But the evidence was undeniable. Payments from a shell company linked to Finn Henderson's network, encrypted calls made from Marcus's phone, and strange trips to Prague that Darren hadn't approved. Betrayal was the one sin Darren couldn't forgive. 3 nights later, Marcus Doyle was found dead in a drained swimming pool behind an abandoned villa outside Marbella. His hands were missing, his phone submerged in a bucket of cement. The police called it gang-related violence. No one was ever charged. Those close to Darren understood the message clearly. Betrayal meant death, no matter how close you were to him. After Marcus's death, Darren changed completely. He began sleeping in different villas each night, never using the same phone twice and traveling with armed bodyguards even to dinner. He trusted no one. His empire, though still strong, became colder, more mechanical. The money continued to flow, but his purpose had shifted. He was no longer building wealth, he was erasing enemies. Meanwhile, Finn Henderson had grown more powerful than ever. He operated quietly, never using violence when influence would do. He owned shipping companies, transport firms, and legitimate businesses that masked his criminal network. Where Darren ruled through fear, Finn ruled through connections. Law enforcement across Europe knew his name but could never pin him down, and he hadn't forgotten the Callaghan. Rumors began to circulate that Finn had been behind the leak that exposed Darren's shipment, using Marcus as a pawn. It was a cruel kind of revenge, a way to make Darren destroy himself. Whether it was true or not, Darren believed it, and his obsession deepened. He began planning his next move, not for profit, but for retribution. In Marbella's nightlife, people whispered about him like a ghost, never seen twice in the same place. Always surrounded by men with guns, his eyes hollow and cold. The once ambitious smuggler who dreamed of power had become a shadow, consumed by paranoia and vengeance. By 2016, Darren's empire reached its peak, stretching from Spain to Portugal and as far as Dubai. Yet for all his success, he lived like a fugitive. Each sunrise brought a new layer of fear. He had money, power, and luxury beyond imagination. But the cost was solitude. The few who still worked for him noticed how often he stared out over the sea, watching the waves crash against the rocks as if searching for something he had lost long ago. No one dared to ask what haunted him, but they all knew the answer. Darren Callaghan had become a king in exile, ruling over a kingdom built on ghosts, and somewhere across the glittering coastline his greatest enemy, Finn Henderson, was still waiting, patient as ever for the perfect moment to strike. The downfall of Darren Callaghan did not come with a gunshot or a betrayal in the night. It came quietly, almost invisibly, through a series of moves so calculated that by the time he realized the walls were closing in, there was nowhere left to run. By 2018, Europe's law enforcement agencies had finally begun working together to dismantle the criminal empires that had flourished for decades under their noses. Operation Atlas, a joint Europol and Spanish intelligence project, was launched to target British crime figures operating abroad. Darren Callaghan, or as his records now identified him, Daniel Clark, was near the top of their list. For years he had evaded attention by keeping a low profile. He didn't flaunt wealth, avoided publicity, and used intermediaries to handle all transactions. But the technology that had once kept him safe became his undoing. Investigators began tracing encrypted phone networks used by his organization, uncovering connections between his shell companies and known traffickers. They followed bank transfers, piecing together fragments of a financial empire worth hundreds of millions. Each thread led back to Marbella, to the man who had turned the city's sunshine into a front for shadow trade. The first raid came in the early hours of a June morning. Dozens of Spanish officers surrounded one of Darren's villas on the outskirts of Puerto Banús. By the time they entered, the property was empty. He had escaped through a tunnel built beneath the garage that led to a neighboring estate. The tunnel, reinforced with concrete and fitted with hidden lights, was a testament to his paranoia and his preparation. The police found weapons, cash and fake passports, but no sign of Darren himself.